In the second part of this chapter 11 screencast, we're going to talk about the signals of abuse, treatment for families, and also how teachers should handle and report the abuse that they think might be occurring in the students in their classroom. So the common signals of abuse, obviously there are definitely signs that children usually exhibit when they are being abused. And you need to be on the lookout for these. The first one is the change in behavior or personality, which could be a marked change from, a kid being very, very happy and positive to being very negative and aggressive and mean. Just see that behavior change. Also, anxiety. They don't feel safe. They're nervous. They're obsessive or compulsive about something. For example, having to wear their jacket all the time, or having to have their shoes tied a certain way. Also, symptoms could be wetting their pants when they weren't doing it before. They might get a lot of stomach aches or headaches. Be on the lookout for those, because those are all signals of abuse. And also, kids might act depressed. Little 8-year-olds should not be depressed. They should be happy, and they should be excited to be at school and learn and be with their friends. But depression can set in for those who are victims of abuse. Some other signals that could come out are anger, and there are a lot of kids who exhibit increased irritability, uncontrollable behaviors. A lot of them are self-directed. They could be mad at themselves, hit themselves, try to cut themselves because they think some of this abuse is their fault. Also, you see a difference in their self-concept. They don't know how to control themselves. They can't calm down. They can't control their emotions. Sometimes they even exhibit separation anxiety, which is kind of counterintuitive if you think about it. If they're being abused by their parents or the adults in their home, that they're afraid of being separated from them, that might seem kind of odd, but that can happen. Also, some students would be considered victims of post-traumatic stress disorder. They exhibit signals of numbing of emotions. They might start having an eating disorder, thoughts that are horrible about themselves. These are all common, to men who have been through war, or to women who have been through war and they have seen horrible things. But these signals, these signs come out as a part of a response to the trauma that they are experiencing. So how do we help students? What are the interventions and treatment that teachers can help them with? Well, first of all, we can only help them if the problems are identified. So you have to report. And that's very hard to do. We'll talk about exactly the steps to go through a little bit later, but you have to be on the lookout, know your students, and identify and report. Usually the assessment and recommendation is conducted by a social worker. It could be the school counselor at the school you're at, but usually it's a very good idea to go to the school counselor and the principal with your concerns before you make a child abuse or neglect hotline call, because those reports are taken very, very seriously, and it's good to get more people involved with their background and their viewpoint, and also they might have other information that you don't have access to. So it's always good to go to those professionals. Sometimes if the child is in danger, the child actually might be removed from the situation, from the home, and that's very, very hard as a teacher to know that that might happen. But you always have to keep in mind that this is for the good of the student. There are other times when the parent could be removed for treatment and the rest of the family is left at the home. So there, either way that could happen. When treatment is given, usually it's for the whole family, which could involve some education, some support, and also some treatment in a facility of some sort. So just know that all of those are options that could happen. There are a lot of long-term effects of child abuse, and as you can imagine, many of them are very negative and difficult for children to deal with and recover from. Some of them, some children will never recover fully from child abuse, and so it's really difficult to know, but the earlier you get treatment for them, the earlier you get them out of the situation, the better off that they will be. But some children, as adults looking back, they report resiliency as a result of their traumatic youth, with a dedication to make their own families happy and healthy. So they come out of it with this renewed sense of, I'm going to make my family better than where I come from. So that is a positive. But on the other hand, many children, like I said, who suffer child abuse and neglect never fully recover, and they sometimes have difficulties in the future with personal and social relationships, and even become abusers themselves as adults. The other part of family violence that we haven't talked about yet is domestic violence. And again, like we talked about with child abuse, it's all about control. A lot of times these families are in poverty situations, or maybe they've lost their jobs, or some sort of thing to where they feel like they've lost control. And so they take it out in a physical way or in an emotional way. Domestic violence can be defined as the pattern of assault and controlling behaviors in the context of an intimate adult relationship. And so it's between the parents or the step dad and the mom, whoever the adults are in the home. Sometimes this affects the kids too, but not all the time. The abuse could be hands-on, as in battering, abusing, or hands-off with emotional torment and degradation. Could be, you are not worth anything, or why are you so stupid, things of that sort. And what's surprising to me is that actually 30% of all women will suffer at one point in their lives in a violent relationship. That's almost 1 in 3 women. That is just astounding to me. I just cannot hardly believe that. But what's kind of hard to understand is that in these relationships, sometimes they have periods of violence, but then they also have periods of calm, where the abuser will ask for forgiveness. They'll say they'll never do it again. They want to come back to the family, all those type of things. So it's a little bit of a roller coaster in that household. So we need to make sure that we don't blame the victims by asking things such as, why doesn't she leave him? Instead, you need to be ready to offer help. Be ready to know what resources are available. This might be something that you ask the school counselor again to get help with what to tell the family. So the long-term effects of violence are very similar to the long-term effects of child abuse. The cycle of violence, there is a cycle that occurs in families, sometimes in families with abuse. It usually is the boys who grow up and abuse their own children, and then the cycle keeps going. And so in order for us to break that cycle, we need to identify these situations early and get them help and treatment. And there are a lot of negative impacts that family violence has on your students in your classroom, and they're very similar to child abuse. You'll see aggression, you'll see lower social competence. In other words, they don't want to interact with other children. They have a lot of anxiety, they have a lot of depression, so just be aware of those things. So what can teachers do? We know all these horrible things, and they happen to kids, and they happen a lot, but what do you do? Well, the first thing is get to know your kids. You need to be alert to how they are behaving. If you see dramatic changes in their behavior, that should be your red flag. If you see some of those signals coming out, like aggression and keeping to themselves and just outbursts of emotions, those can be red flags as well. But make sure that you know that not just because a child exhibits some of those signals does not automatically mean they're being abused. So be aware of that. The second one is be alert to cues from parents. This is important because if you are in constant communication with parents, which I hope you will be, that's what we've been talking about, communicating with parents, getting them on board, then you will see, more than likely, you'll see some of these things. If they blame their child, if they see their child as bad all the time, if they find nothing good, if they just maybe are not concerned at all, they're negligent, all of these things, be aware of those and know what to do. Know how to bring attention to that, maybe to your principal again or to the counselor. And speaking of the counselor, this should be the person that you seek out. when you have concerns. It's not really your job to investigate into the family life, even though you will know some things because of your communication with the family. But the counselor is the one that should handle the interview with the child. If it's really an abusive type situation, you see bruises, you see cuts, those type of things, it's better that a trained counselor would handle that. You need to make sure, if this happens, that the child knows that they're not in trouble, that their classmates will never know what's going on. Just assure them that you're there for support. And if you ever do suspect a very an abusive situation, it would be better not to let the parents know that you're kind of trying to find out information. And the reason is because you do not want to be held liable for anything that happened to the child. You do not want to be the reason that the parent takes that child and leaves, and then the authorities don't know where they've gone. So it's best to talk to the counselor, get some more information, and then let the counselor and the principal take it from there. In some school districts, you will still need to report it on the hotline, but usually school districts have a flow chart of steps that need to be taken when you're reporting abuse, and you should always follow those. So, reporting. This is really important. You are what is called a mandated reporter. By state and federal standards, you must report concerns or suspicions that you have about child abuse or neglect. You have to. If you don't, you could be held liable later. And it's very, very important. You need to know certain things when you're reporting, and obviously the child, where they live, their parents, the type of injuries they have, things that you've observed. You need to, you need to start taking notes. If you start suspecting some things in your class, it would be a good idea to have dates and times and injuries dated on some notes, and that's really important when you're reporting. And then you need to be aware of resources in your community, in the state, things available to parents where you can be helpful to them. This might be different than in our community, so I just want you to be aware of the ones that are available in your community and in your state. And here are some phone numbers that are nationwide. So the Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline, the Resource for Domestic Violence, and then the National Clearinghouse on Child Abuse and Neglect. So all those phone numbers are things that you should keep handy and you should go to if you ever need help. But above all, what you need to remember is that you keep the students in your care safe. And if that means that they need to be out of the home that they're in, then that's what it means, because they are your number one concern.